another episode of Chrysalis Collective, the podcast. Today we are chatting about demystifying decertification. I'm Alexis Ramirez.
I'm Savannah Taylor.
And demystifying decertification sounds like a mouthful for sure. And I think it's a lot for even me to kind of try to wrap my head around sometimes, because certification is such a stamp of
For sure.
validation and approval, and you telling me that I know what I know. But if I trust myself and don't need you to tell me that I know what I know, what part do you really play?
Absolutely. Well, first things first, I love making up really complicated words that sound just like funny sayings. And so demystifying decertification, that's just some of my favorite things to do.
So right up my alley.
Yeah, exactly. Creating funny sayings that sound really smart. So yeah, I mean, I think that in the birth world particularly, there are really polar kind of spheres, and it can be really difficult because in our line of work, you need the trust of other people to refer to you, and you need the trust of other people to have a community where you can ask people questions and learn and grow, and need to feel safe and seen in that. But certification is something that I have had to really kind of figure out what I believe about it, because it's been such a journey from starting my career as a birth worker through DONA International and getting DONA certified, all the way to the place where I'm at now, where it's like I don't have, nor do I desire, any outside certification outside of my certificate of my lactation counselor designation, which is that gives me the available, I can go in and do a lot of different things with that and be recognized with that. But outside of that, I have zero desire to maintain any type of certification as a birth worker, postpartum worker, death worker, loss worker, any of that.
I'm thinking about DONA and
let's talk about DONA.
I feel like if you have gotten trained through them, there's going to have to be a lot of unlearning to go along with all the learning that you did. I think that at the beginning of me looking for certification or what I felt like was aligned with what I wanted to learn and know, I settled on Austin Baby Guru certification, and I did that primarily because it was local to where I was, and to me finding community was the most important part of partaking in anything like that. Because what's the point of knowing all of these things and not feeling connected to a community? Community is what has constantly been a common thread in my journey into birth work, and so now being on the precipice of wanting to enter birthing spaces and be of support, I'm having to really think about, do I want to have that validation, and if so, for what reason? And on top of that, knowing that the things that I learned in my postpartum certification course and everything was a great nugget and basis. It wasn't necessarily the end all be all, and knowing that regardless you have to continue education somehow, and that has to be on your own terms. So what do I really want out of being able to be in those birthing spaces and feel confident in them? Is certification gonna make me feel confident, or is experience? Because right now I really just feel like I've been in so many postpartum spaces, and of course not identical to birth, but regardless it's super vulnerable and very charged energetically being in somebody's postpartum space. It's the same thing being in a birthing space. So how does that translate? I guess I feel like a lot of people are so straight for birth, like they start off as birth doulas, and I feel like I've gone at it and in just a different way. So now I'm just kind of like, okay, what does that mean? Because now I have all of these knowings and I'm very knowledgeable on birth, but I don't feel like I need someone to tell me that. And it's like something that I go back and forth with in my head.
Sure. Yeah, because there are a lot of different types of knowledge, and there are a lot of different types of receiving knowledge, and also we have kind of imposter syndrome and think that, you know, because you don't have a certificate, or because you didn't sit in a 3-day training, or because you didn't pay $1,200 to receive some arbitrary title, that you can't step into these spaces. But the truth about all of this type of work, life transition work, is that this is innate calling. This is innate source knowledge that is within us, it's within our bodies. To understand how a baby rotates through the pelvis, it is something that you have a deep, deep connection to because you exist. And while you can receive the knowledge of experience from other people to come down and to teach you, and there is so much reverence and ancestral knowledge and wisdom in learning from people who have come before us. There's a big difference in my mind in accepting that and paying for it with an energy exchange, and a behemoth of an organization that is only in it for a type of power, and that is there for, you know, to maintain their organizational structure and status. And so I'll talk about my experience a little bit with going through DONA and deconstructing and what that looks like for me now, because there's definitely a part of me that is embarrassed to even say that I was a DONA certified doula, or that's where I became initiated into birth work. But I came into birth work from a very, very, very fear-based place. I had a really traumatic birth, and I was looking to heal my own trauma through birth work, which is why so many people come into this space. And if my biggest thing to say to people now is, like, work on all of your stuff so that you don't take it into the spaces with your clients. But it's really common for people to come to this line of work from a place of trauma. And I had asked my labor and delivery nurse mother where to get trained as a doula, and she first of all told me that, like, everybody hates doulas. Doulas are not, like, you're not gonna work, nobody's gonna work with a doula, but if they are, you have to go through DONA. And so I went through DONA to appease the idea that I would have to get along with labor and delivery nurses, and that I would have to get along with doctors. And I didn't, until much later in my practice, realize, oh, I want to deconstruct this entire system. I want this to all completely be turned upon its head, and I don't want to get along with any of you, actually. I am actively going to work on creating something that is so different, and I'm never going to step foot in these types of birthing spaces ever again, which is why I don't attend real, like, hospital births regularly anymore. But my training was with one of DONA's most popular trainers, and she's a white woman, and I will say I received good information in terms of explaining the birthing process. Fine. You can receive that information on YouTube. And you can practice hip squeezes at home with somebody. That's not, something super unique, but there was absolutely no discussion of maternal mortality, of racism in birth, or of unnecessary interventions, obstetric abuse. The trainer was very much focused on what specific type of role we should be playing as a doula, which is not an advocate.
Ooh.
We are not an advocate in the birth space. And then I ended up certifying through them. I actually ended up sitting on, like, some of their committees, and it wasn't until I was on the committee and I was doing some work there and saw like a real darker underside to everything, and a lot more of the organizational power and hierarchy, the fact that we couldn't really test, like, hey, are we sure DONA should be doing this? Like, hey, I don't really like this language that's being used, and getting shut down over and over and over again from people inside the DONA board, realizing like, I'm not really loving, like, this is not actually in alignment with who I am as a birth worker. And then also the recertification process, because at about this time it was time for me to recertify. And to recertify, you have to do all of this extra work, and you have to pay all of this extra money, and you have to pay money every single year to be a part of like a membership fee. For DONA. And if you don't have the membership, then you can't be a certified. And if you aren't certified, you can't sit on the committee. And I was like, I'm done. I'm out of the committee. I don't want to do any of this. I let my certification lapse. And at that point, I mean, I already had kind of radical beliefs about birth, but systemically, I was like, you know, what I'm trying to do and who I'm trying to be does not align with the whole entire process of certification, because I don't believe in gatekeeping knowledge around birth. I don't believe in gatekeeping knowledge around the sacred. I believe in receiving knowledge and teaching knowledge and learning as much as you can and paying people for teaching for their knowledge, but I do not believe in institutionalized knowledge or organization, and that's just my truth, and I'm not going to change that opinion.
Yeah, that's very valid. I'm thinking about the omission of any kind of, like, omitting experience from that kind of system when you're talking about not touching on Black maternal health, not touching, I'm just thinking about also DONA's whole like thing when it comes to rebozo use, and like
that was a big part of it. They definitely appropriated the rebozo in the 3 days there, and I did not learn about the ancestral history surrounding it. I didn't learn about the actual like what this is in these cultures. We were like, here's link on Amazon, you can order, buy 10 of them here. That's what I did. Didn't even really put 2 and 2 together until later, where I was like, oh, I'm perpetuating this type of harm. And it's on me now to deconstruct everything and to listen and to learn and to step back. And I took a step back for about a year and a half while I was actively working to really, really take a look at what doing this work in alignment with my values looks like.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really beautiful space that you were able to own, like, okay, this isn't like, I'm not void of how I was influenced from these kind of structures, you know, and now I'm doing the work to make sure that I'm not perpetuating that. Like, that speaks volumes to your openness and living in accordance with your values, because when we're learning from sources that only have knowledge in a certain way and have these crazy power structures, then that does no good for anybody at the end of the day. You're just allowing all of the other ways that capitalism and neoliberalism exists in our world to flow in a space that's very sacred. Birth is super sacred, and no part of that should be injected into that space.
And it should be decolonized. And the type of knowledge, like the certification process is going, like, it's removing what a really true keeper of birth has historically been. It is taking that and commodifying it and putting a specific type of label on it, to where if you don't have this certain CD after your name or whatever it is, that you cannot sit in this space. You cannot call yourself this type of thing. And it's happening all over too in the United States, where under the guise of reimbursement or getting financial support for birth and postpartum support, Medicare or different insurance companies, TRICARE, things like that, are so heavily restricting support support to birth workers and postpartum workers. And if you're not, like in Ohio, if you're not certified under the Board of Nursing, then you don't get to call yourself that anymore. And that's part of why, like, I think we are moving consciously away from the term doula, because doula itself has been so commodified.
For sure. I'm just thinking about all of the ancestral saberes that just exist from being a part of day to day being in a community, right?
Yes.
That space has always been
It's
held.
always been there, and it's so different to have a non-hierarchical community space that is just like, I was Sumi's Touch, do you know? Okay, did you see it's Black Maternal Health Week this week, and they put out a post about there is a solution to all of this. It is getting back to the roots of ancestral knowledge. It is getting down to traditional midwifery, traditional birth keeping, traditional community support. It is rejecting the norms of neoliberal capitalism and focusing on the beautifully powerful structure of one another.
Yeah, well, and I'm just thinking about all of the certifications that do exist, and like, if you're going to pick one that you actually feel like your values are aligned with it.
Sure.
Like, I know that I have gotten a partial scholarship to do the I'm gonna say BADT, but it's birthing advocacy doula training. Yeah, and I really loved how expansive the full spectrum quote unquote doula training was, because it gave me an opportunity to see all of these different aspects of what it means to be a birth worker and be in those spaces and be in touch with other people's wounds. And I didn't necessarily finish, I don't have a certification, but seeing that certifications like that exist, it's like, okay, I see, and there's validity in it as long as you're not perpetuating certain, like, if it's not totally for profit or whatever. Like, I don't know what kind of economic, financial, fiscal, whatever structure they have going on, but I think that it's really important to just find one that aligns with your values if that's something that you choose to do, but I really don't think that it's necessary.
No, and I don't have any, qualms about people going out there and receiving certifications.
Yeah.
Like, I think that it is a really great way to get immersed in the knowledge, taking different trainings, and if you want to go further and do all of the different steps, then that's really wonderful. But for me, what I have found the most knowledge through has been my hands-on experience of sitting with people and getting the first-hand source awareness of the intersection of all of this, of birth and death and loss and bleeding and the womb and postpartum, and that all of it is so intimately connected, and that there is really nothing that you can train someone on to be able to fully embrace that understanding and that truth and that knowing. And that for me, it is not something that I've ever necessarily arrived at, but it's just a continual process of sitting in that space that is just so profound. Birth and postpartum and grief and loss and all of the things, they are such profound teachers.
Yeah.
And this work is less about a career and more about the feeling that there is some divine force pulling me into these spaces and pushing me through them for some whatever reason, to open myself up and to sit with others in these spaces in transitional parts of their life. And there's nothing that you can get from an online, whatever.
You can't teach that. You can't teach energy. It just is, right? Like, you having energy that is open and safe for other people's vulnerability in their most intimate times and transitions in their life. Like, there is no replicating that. You can't teach that to anybody. It just is. And I think that it comes with intense deconstruction of the self and of really honoring what space and to what kind of parameters or kind of uncomfortable edge at times, where at times that is no longer the space that I occupy for other people. Like that is something that is yours to hold, and I can be here and bear witness to it. But that, I think a lot of times in the kind of work that we do, realizing and really walking in the knowing that like I can be here for you, but only up to a certain point.
Yeah. And a lot of
that's something you also can't teach.
No, I mean, so much of the work that we do is very like Mary Poppins-esque. That's like, I'm here when it's right for me to be here. I know when it's time for me to remove myself from this space, but I will always be watching and waiting and around, you know. Man, I was just thinking about how clients too, there can be a lot of questions about, you know, like, where did you get certified, or what did you go through, or, you know, how did you come to this space? And I would like to push back on those questions and think about, like, what do you need from me? You know, what is it that you want from this person in this role in your life and in your relationship? You know, because if it is something that's like knowing when you should leave to go to your birth space, my doula training taught me the 5-1-1 rule. My experience and my life has taught me that each labor pattern is distinctly different, and there is no one size fits all approach for when you should be receiving care. My doula training taught me that, you know, I should only go to visit somebody in active labor. My life experience has taught me that a lot of people really benefit, especially first-time parents, really benefit from early labor support for just a little bit, and being told that they're safe and how to relax and how to rest. And, you know, I would ask of clients who are curious to know about certification, ask yourself, is this a anxiety response? Do I need to feel like I can control something? Or am I seeking out something that's bigger than just a piece of paper from this person that I'm engaging with? Because when I'm working with clients, and when you're working with clients, it's business, but it's not just business.
It's such an energetic exchange.
Absolutely.
And I always say how intimate and vulnerable it is, because it is. And there's no matter what way your birth looks or postpartum, no matter how much community support you have or don't, regardless, we're entering those spaces and you feel how much of an energetic exchange it is, because I'm having to make sure that I am extremely present. I have to stay grounded when I'm entering those spaces, because if not, when somebody is in that sensitive of a period in their life, they're going to feel that. I don't want to, like you were saying earlier, like I don't want to carry any of that into those spaces. It's not fair.
No. And you're 100% right. And those are all things that cannot be learned from a classroom. But there is a lot of knowledge that, you know, you can receive from different trainings and different organizations, and there are some really solid ones out there. I don't know the name, like I can't think off the top of my head. I wish that I had kind of a list of people that I could recommend, and so maybe we can put that in some notes here. But my advice to people who are interested in getting into either birth or postpartum, or death work too, because there's death worker certifications as well. You know, ask yourself, like, what does this organization stand for? What are their philosophies? Am I able to be in a space where knowledge might be conflicting and not take that in on some unconscious level? You know, if there's something that doesn't feel like it's in alignment with me, am I gonna just take it as truth regardless? Really deconstruct what you believe about knowledge in general, and take everything as kind of dispassionately as you can, and just accept what comes to you as truth, and what doesn't come to you as truth, pass it along, let it go. You don't have to, just because a certain trainer has told you something is the way to do it, you don't have to do it that way.
I'm also thinking about imposter syndrome, because that's oftentimes something, you brought it up earlier, but it is something that comes up a lot when truly you're just a beginner in the space. They're imposter for what? Like,
yeah,
I'm just learning, and I think that if we, and I'm talking to myself really, if I stop thinking about how I need to know everything and have all the answers, it gives me a lot more space to free up and just say, hey, I'm learning. I'm a beginner at this. I don't know every single thing, but guess what? I'll find out. Like, I'm going to find out eventually. So I'm making this an open call also. If anybody would feel comfortable with having me at their birth, I would love to come and be of support, or just be a quiet shadow in the background, whatever feels right. But I think an appropriate energetic exchange for being in someone's birth space like that is offering a closing of the bones and cerrando las caderas ceremony for postpartum. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, let me know.
Yeah, we are both available for supporting births, and so you can absolutely choose to have one or both of us in your birth space if that's something that feels in alignment with you. If you're birthing in a hospital, I will absolutely show the picture I have of my certification if that's something that is needed. But that did make me think about in times of the pandemic and everything that's followed, how certification has become weaponized, not only by the insurance companies, but by the hospital systems. It was always their intent to separate you from your support person as soon as they could do it, so that they could do all of this other stuff to you. As soon as they could, they did. And that's why we still have hospital restrictions on birth support and labor support and doulas. Like, that's the point. That's what they wanted to happen. And so if you don't have this quote unquote certification, and oftentimes that certification is from a list of like 2 or 3 different organizations. You can go through DONA, you can go through CAPA, you can maybe go through BEST, and there's a few of the bigger ones. But if you have a smaller certification, that's not even going to be recognized, and that sort of thing is just so angering to me, because it shows it's very similar to like the food and drug and pharmaceutical companies that are hand in hand here. Like, who's really the power at B?
Yeah, and it's not for the well-being of the individual at all, ever.
No, not at all. You should have your babies at home if you can. Be great.
I would love that for everybody.
It's not for everyone, but if you can do it, it's the most amazing experience. Fully support.
Within reason. And we'd love to support. Yeah.
Absolutely. You can book us for birth, postpartum, death services. You can book us for different transitional release services as well, miscarriage, loss, abortion support. You can book us online at chrysaliscollective.me. You can also find us on Instagram
at @the_chrysalis_collective, and we have a womb community workshop coming up on May 25th at Heart of Houston Birth Center here in Houston, Texas. We will be journaling, meditating, doing period art, really connecting to our wombs and doing that in community, which is the best way to do it.
Absolutely, yes. You can register for that on Eventbrite through the link in our Instagram. We need to figure out how to link our events calendar to our website. So that was a thought I just had, and that's out there on the podcast, so it's going to be there for everybody.
Now you have to.
Now I have to do it. I'm going to follow through. All right, until next time, I'm Savannah Taylor.
And I'm Alexis Ramirez.
We are Chrysalis Collective.
Peace. Oh my God, my foot.